It's time for Agriculture, presented by Turkana Farms in Germantown, New York, a small-scale producer of heritage breed livestock and a wide array of vegetables and berries on just over 39 acres. They also produce a full array of garden vegetables, many of them heirloom varieties raised naturally, as well as an assortment of berries, including raspberries, blackberries, gooseberries, black, red, and white currants, mulberries, and elderberries. And now, here's Mark Scherzer.
As a cool, dampish week transitioned to a hotter, sunny weekend, we passed through what seemed to me on Friday evening a moment of perfect balance. Comfortable, perfect for a dinner on the screen porch. Looking out as our little retreat became enveloped in velvety twilight, highlighted by pinpoints of hundreds of firefly lights, evoked in my mind the words luxe, calme, et volupté. It's a French phrase I first encountered over 50 years ago in a college course on Baudelaire and his fellow 19th century romantic poets. Perhaps the phrase, there are several viable translations, but for these purposes I would say luxuriance, calm, and voluptuousness, or desire, was so appealing to focus on because it so contrasted with how I felt. With the throat ravaged by a mild case of COVID, I could be more aptly described as red, raspy, and raw. There's nothing either luxuriant or calm about such a state, and I was too listless to feel desire. Yes, after dodging the virus for over 2 years, my boyfriend Eric woke up with symptoms one morning suggesting that a test was in order. Soon after he tested positive, my own symptoms and positive test ensued. Like so many of us, we now see the infection as inevitable and as unlikely to be avoided as the common cold. If Dr. Fauci could test positive, surely it did not reflect badly on us to have been infected as well. Eric and I isolated together to support each other as our symptoms permitted. As Eric put it, little did we know that, like fireflies, we were flashing on and off our mild symptoms, promenading our spirits accordingly on highs and lows and trying to make the best of it. The words of comfort and practical advice from our loved ones and the undeniable realness of farm work made this week more like the prosaic Zola than the poetic Baudelaire. But that's Eric and his French soul. It's never convenient to get sick, and especially not to isolate. My friend Paul had returned for a visit, intent on helping me make up for the time lost on barn painting to get the garden fully planted. I had to evict him just after he finished planting the first flat of peppers, and I was not in shape to continue the campaign on my own. We had planned a special dinner this week to introduce Tom, my newest friend of 1 year vintage, to George, my best friend of 53 years. Canceled, to great disappointment all around. But in the big picture, these are minor inconveniences. I count my blessings. I was privileged enough to avoid exposure by working remotely when the virus was at its most lethal. Frontline workers, who from economic necessity had to keep serving the public in person, had no such option. I benefited also from the development of vaccines that blunted the virus's effects. Vaccines have, at far less cost than natural infection and the million American deaths it caused, transformed the disease from a frequently lethal one for people of my age to something that often seems to most resemble a bad cold or mild flu. I was lucky to have had my last booster at the end of May, meaning I was infected at the peak of my resistance. My friend and frequent farm sitter, Steve, who suffered with long COVID for many months after becoming infected in the first vicious New York City wave of March 2020, responded to the reports of our illness by saying, "When I hear of these mild cases, it just blows my mind. Sick for a week? Maybe I'll work in the garden? Vaccines are miracles. I'm glad for your mild cases, but it's like hearing that the guy who beat you up and put you in the hospital with broken ribs after a date brought flowers and chocolates and took his next 5 dates to the opera. Maybe only in the week when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade could I find good news in catching a pandemic disease. After all, the most permanently entrenched and least politically responsive branch of government has just in an ominous way rejected any constitutional protection for a person's right to control what happens to her own body, Many other of our hard-won freedoms are now also in jeopardy. On top of that, there was other bad news in spades involving natural disasters, climate change, war, and politics. But the much less lethal effect of COVID, as is being demonstrated in our case and those of millions of others, is good news that I'm choosing to celebrate.
Agriculture is underwritten by Turkana Farms, LLC, a small-scale producer of heritage-bred livestock and a wide array of vegetables and berries on just over 39 acres in Germantown, New York. More information, 518-537-3815.